This podcast is brought to you by the Heldridge Hotel, New Brunswick's only 4-star hotel and a preferred hotel of Rutgers football fans. The Heldridge helps you make the most of your game day weekend, providing premium accommodations in the cultural heart of downtown New Brunswick. Restaurants, bars, theaters, parks, museums, and more are only steps away. Whether you're traveling alone or with a large group, book your stay at the Heldridge and make the most of your game day weekend. Visit theheldridge.com today.
Save on Cox Internet when you add Cox Mobile and get fiber-powered internet at home and unbeatable 5G reliability on the go. So whether you're playing a game at home,
yes, goal,
or attending one live, you can do more without spending more. Learn how to save at cox.com/internet. Cox Internet is connected to the premises via coaxial cable. Cox Mobile runs on the network with unbeatable 5G reliability as measured by Ookla LLC in the U.S. 2H 2023. Results may vary, not an endorsement. Other restrictions apply.
From NJ.com and the Star Ledger, welcome to the Rutgers Rant, your one-stop podcast for the Scarlet Knights, with your hosts Steve Politi and Rutgers insiders Brian Fonseca and Pat Lenny. Let's start shopping.
All right, everybody, welcome back to the Rutgers Rant. We're all here today. No Super Bowl hangover on this show. Right back to work on a Monday morning. You guys watch the big game?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Not much of a big game. Reminded me games of my childhood, like Chargers, 49ers, some bad Super Bowls back in the day. I'm dating myself there a little bit, I guess.
Yeah, it was rough. I felt bad for Isaiah Pacheco, who did not have a particularly productive day, but also nobody on the Chiefs had a productive day because, I mean, the stats were nuts. How the Eagles didn't blitz one time, and yet it felt like every snap they had 9 guys in the backfield. I guess, like, this is to bring it back to Rutgers, which is our job. This is the opposite of what the Rutgers defensive front was this season, right? So if they can get anywhere closer to whatever that was, maybe the greatest, one of the greatest NFL defensive fronts of all time, that's kind of what Rutgers is working towards.
I will say this, like there was a couple of Rutgers moments. Like if you watched Rutgers football during some dark days, you knew that Cooper DeJean was a good player. Like when he made that interception, I'm like, I've seen that before. I saw that happen. The Iowa game, Rutgers was up 3-0. Can you name the quarterback you picked off? Little Rutgers trivia? Come on.
I can, because I saw you quote tweet it, so I won't say it. I'll let Pat take it. Yes.
Oh, wow. He was hurt when they played at Iowa, so it wasn't that game. He did not play in that game. So it had to have been a year before. Oh, it was Evan Simon.
There you go. Bing,
yes,
bing, bing, bing.
Yes, that was a big turnover game. Yes.
Yeah, it was incredible. It was like the nicest catch turned around. And I tweeted at the time, like, the Giants could use a player like that. And instead, the Eagles got him.
Shocking.
So congratulations to our South Jersey listeners. I'm sure there are more than a few Eagles fans here who enjoyed that. You certainly deserved it. You were the best team by far.
I will say, Steve, I read your column during the week about how Giants fans have to support Saquon. There's probably 1% of the Giants fan base happy for Saquon. 99% of people punching holes in the walls that this guy won a Super Bowl with the biggest rival.
Right. Yeah, that's true. No, probably. Good point. Although I will say, like, the one time, and I thought it was going to be a nonstop Giants bashing over that. And the one time that the Giants really came up during that game was Tom Brady talking about how Patrick Mahomes is never going to live this down, just like he'll never forget the Giants' 2007 Super Bowl. So the Giants, they did have at least one moment of happiness. Tom Brady with his $740,000 watch, reliving the 2007 Super Bowl. Other than that, not a good time to be a Giants fan right now. Holy cow.
Not good.
Man, not good.
One other Rutgers point I was thinking about watching the Super Bowl was, and Brian just talked about the pass rush and disruptive defense. And it always comes down to, in these huge games when you have to neutralize a great quarterback, can you get to him? And if you think about that 2007 Giants team, like the pass rush was incredible, just buried Brady, and that's why they won the game. And obviously that was the story last night as well. So Rutgers thinks they have a couple of good pass rushers on this team, but we've also been saying that the last couple of years too. So we'll see.
And just to be clear, so people don't think we're setting the standard unbelievably high, I don't think Eric O'Neal is going to be Montez Sweat. I don't think the Ohio guy is going to become Michael Strahan. Like, we're comparing them to these all-time defensive fronts. We're talking conceptually, right? Just to be abundantly clear before people think, Rutgers has to be, the steel curtain before the NJ.com guys are satisfied.
I think could become Jalen Carter. That's great. I love that. Yeah, it's good. That's a good point. Yeah.
Great point. Great point.
All right. Well,
just getting some pressure, getting some sacks. Let's start there. For Rutgers.
Yes. All right. I'm going to leave it there before we start talking about the halftime show, which was a topic of discussion on the Discord this week. Some people, one person, not happy with the Kendrick Lamar halftime show.
Speaking generally, my hot take on halftime shows is they're dumb. They should stop. And there's never been a good halftime show. They're all terrible. And
that's a hot take.
They defeat the purpose of the Super Bowl. The Super Bowl is about football. It's the biggest game of the biggest sport in America.
I get you, but except I had like a 13-year-old girl on the couch last night who's only watching this to see the halftime show. So I think you are forgetting that this is 100 million people watching this thing. That's the point I would make.
Yes, I agree. As a commodity, the halftime show and the commercials are important to the viewership, and that's why the NFL makes so much money. They probably couldn't count it in a million years, sitting in a room counting bill by bill. As a sporting event, as a spectacle, it is a disgrace and minimizes the importance of this game. It's unnecessary and infuriating for me as a soccer fan. The Champions League final has started doing like these pregame concerts on the field and trying to Americanize. It is infuriating. Just play football. Okay. Anyway,
you know what I learned, Pat? I learned two things from the halftime show. Number one, Kendrick Lamar, wee man. He's like 5'4". I didn't know that. And number two, apparently, and tell me if you knew this, has a bit of a beef with another rapper named Drake. Did you know this?
I was aware.
How about that, huh?
Yeah.
Not a friendly beef, from what I've been able to ascertain.
That's apparently true. Apparently true.
Yes.
Apparently true. I can't elaborate any more than that, but that's all I got for you.
Yeah. Even my kids in my basement last night going A minor, and I'm like, what is that? Oh, it's a double. See, it's like a double thing. It's like A minor and see what he did there? Can't slip one past this old guy. All right, let's talk Rutgers.
The guitar chord or what?
Let's talk Rutgers before we get in trouble. A 90-81 loss to Maryland at Maryland. Womp womp. Essentially, I don't know anywhere I'd put it. You can't string two wins together. Ace Bailey, not himself. This is like there's always something. It's like Gildan Radner's old line from Saturday Night Live. Always something. Now it's Ace Bailey who wasn't feeling well. But Brian, the bigger takeaway, it just lost to a better team, right? I mean, they were outclassed by Maryland, one of the better teams in the not the best team in the Big Ten by any stretch, but a really good basketball team, 14-1 at home, well coached. That's it. They lost.
Rutgers fans are begging us to talk about the Super Bowl again, by the way. Like, please skip, go back. Talk about Kendrick Lamar again. Yes, there are, as we've established, many things wrong with this Rutgers basketball team, right? I think two of the biggest flaws were exposed yesterday in that they have no front court depth, especially with Emmanuel Bole. We said many things about Emmanuel Bole. This was probably one of the games this year that they really needed him just to be a body in the middle. And even if he fouls 5 times in 5 minutes, at least he's there being a little bit disruptive. They had one guy in Lathan Somerville who had one of his better games offensively. Like, I was really impressed with some of the shots he hit and some of the moves he was able to make in traffic. Like, we've always felt he has good potential offensively. I saw a lot of that yesterday. Defensively, he struggled against Maryland's really, really, really good bigs, especially Derek Queen, just a stud of a 5-star freshman. And on the glass, like just getting devoured on the glass. He had 6 boards, but just devoured nonetheless. And another issue that hasn't really been a huge issue, should have been an issue against Illinois. They got 3-point luck there. Against Maryland, Maryland hits 10 threes. Rutgers hits 2 threes in the first 39 minutes, both from Zach Martini. They don't have guys who can hit threes. That's the reality. And the two guys that they have that can hit threes, Zach Martini has started to hold his own. He had a decent game yesterday, I'd say. He's had 3 games in a row where, whether it's defensively or overall, he's had a good game. PJ Hayes didn't even step on the court, right? So you have one guy on your roster that's playing that could hit a 3 regularly, right? Dylan Harper, they're going under on screens against him, practically daring him to take threes off the dribble, and he can't hit one. Ace Bailey, they're face guarding him and denying him the ball. And whenever he does have the ball, he's not in position. And so as far as his illness, I thought pregame, he was the last guy to take the court for warmups, but he looked fine. He looked like his energetic self. He was going through warmups regularly. Nothing stood out to me other than his tardiness. But in the first half, like he wasn't getting his shots. He was forcing things. Two or three really bad turnovers, and probably could have had 3 or 4 more. Just really sloppy with the ball, not as sure of himself. So I don't know if that's illness. I don't know if that's the defensive game plan. I don't know if that's just how things broke out. But when you have one of your 2 freshmen not playing well and sick, when you can't hit a 3, you had 2 threes in the first 39 minutes, and when you can't box out and defend inside, I mean, you have little hope of winning these games.
Right.
Just want to add to your point about Maryland being the better team, and this point was brought up on the broadcast, so I'm not going to take credit for this, but they're just a high efficiency on both ends of the floor, offensive, defensive, shot the ball really well in this game. But if one thing goes wrong for Maryland, you feel like that's a team that can overcome that because they do everything kind of well. Rutgers is a team where it shoots as poorly as it did at Maryland, has huge mismatch on the interior. They're not going to overcome those things. With Maryland, you felt watching that game, right? If something goes wrong, they can throw it inside. If they're shooting the ball extremely well, like they were from 3, they can do that. It's just like they had the well-roundedness that Rutgers has lacked all season. Yeah. That's why Maryland's the better team.
Everything has to go right for Rutgers. You're absolutely right. And Maryland's not like that. It's a great observation. And it doesn't hurt that best freshman on the court was Derek Queen by far, 29 points, 15 rebounds. He had that moment early, Brian. He blocks Ace Bailey. I thought that the game was over then in a lot of ways. I get it was only 19-18 at that point, but it was just this moment of, all right, they've got an answer for there's talent on talent here. Our best against their best. I get it. Ace was sick. He didn't look like the same player after that. I don't know if you agree with that statement or not. I get it. He wasn't feeling well, but I'm sure that's what it was. But it was also not a good matchup for him.
No, I don't know. It's always hard for Ace Bailey when he's getting just denied the ball. They don't let him get the ball essentially and force him to take tough 2s. And he makes the tough 2s, but if you're opposing coach, you take him taking tough 2s over unguarded 3s any day of the week. And they got what they wanted. He had 2 makes and 3 turnovers in 24 minutes. That's as good as you're going to get guarding Ace Bailey. It's impossible to do better. And again, I think part of it is the game plan. I think part of it is the matchup. And I think part of it is the illness. I don't think saying he's sick is going to excuse the bad game because he's had bad games when he's been fully healthy, to my knowledge, right? The thing with Maryland on the roster, Steve Pikiell said he had Kevin Willard had a great roster. This is the 3rd time at least this season that Steve has made some sort of, comment like that, essentially saying they have enough money to get a good roster. Kevin Willard did a great job in this. Last year's team was not great. They defended well. They couldn't shoot anywhere. But they had a really good center in Julian Reese. They managed to keep their elite center, add a second elite center in a 5-star freshman to bolster their interior defense. And they fixed their shooting by adding 3 guards, at least. I have to look back at the roster to make sure it's not 4, but 3 guys who can create off the dribble, who can hit 3s. Ronnie Rice was sniping yesterday. I mean, they could not stop. Selton Miguel was sniping. He was 4-7 in the first half on 3s. Right? They have multiple guys who can score, create for themselves, create for others. So he fixed his deficiencies in the portal, which, yes, you need the money to do that. But the scouting was also there, right? They found guys that fit exactly what they need. So Kevin Willard deserves a lot of credit for that, right? Like there's a lot of teams that just buy players and it doesn't work out, right? You can buy a bunch of talent. It doesn't work out. He bought really good players that fit exactly what he needed. I think that deserves a lot of praise from Kevin Willard, who, yes, you're not right. They're not going to win the Big Ten this year. They're going to have a chance of making a run in March Madness because they have a really well-constructed roster with veterans and a really talented freshman queen.
Right. Yeah. And Pat, meanwhile, I don't understand. I'm at the point now where I'm not quite sure what's going on with Rutgers' personnel. Like I get it. There's no answer. Look at it in the bench. There's no really answer there. But Dirk Hack will play 14 minutes. One game. I mean, there's just Tyson Acups disappeared. PJ Hayes disappears. Now Martini's playing 25 minutes. I guess that's part of the injury. I get it. There's not. It just seems like, Steve Pikiell's throwing darts.
I remember early on in the that's exactly how the feeling is for me as well. Early on in the season, you asked Steve Pikiell one of the better questions that I can remember. Is it a luxury to have all these options? And turns out it's not actually a good approach.
Seemed like a good question at the time.
It was a good question 2 weeks into the season.
Exactly. Look good
when you're still trying to figure it out.
Yeah. Whoops.
So interesting. You and it's always felt this way all season long. Like Rutgers, okay, this is going to be the answer. And I think Steve Pikiell's found this too, right? Like, we finally found this. Dylan Grant, it's working really well. He plays a great game. Jordan Durkat goes for 26 against Michigan State. This is going to be Tyson Acuff has a 20. And one of these guys can consistently carry this over into the next game, but no, that has not happened. And I don't know if that's what the streakiness is, how it's all happened, for whatever the reason may be. It just has not come together at all. So that streakiness and that unevenness and unsteadiness has been just the only constant of the season.
The only consistency is inconsistency. I don't know when Steve asked that question. It sounds like it was early in the season because this roster might have a lot of options against Northeast Conference opponents or MAC opponents, not against the Big Ten, right? Because it's one thing to have bodies. It's another thing to have options. Guys who you can throw into a game and depend and know that they can give you consistent defense and can score and all these things. Rutgers doesn't have the third guy. The mythical third scorer is going to be one of the themes of this season that we're going to look back on 10 years. There's not a guy who you can depend on. Ace is having a bad night. Here, we're going to plug in this guy. I know he'll give me 15 points on, whatever. That guy just doesn't exist. Dylan Grant has been a revelation, right? Like he's had some really, really good games recently. Had his second best game of the year yesterday. I still think his game against Nebraska was better. But he's shooting 22% on threes, right? So he's not a solution from 3-point land as he looked like at some stretch in the season. And he's kind of the face of this whole inconsistency thing, because as good as he's been the last 2 or 3 weeks, where the hell was he in November and December when he should have been playing to acclimate himself, against the Merrimacks and the St. Peters? Where was he then? Was he not ready? And then suddenly 2 months later, he's the third best player on this team. Again, I think he's kind of just the face of this grasping for straws, trying to find something solution. That worked with Dylan Grant. Like it worked. He's legitimately going to be, him and Somerville are going to be the key, keeping them to having a competent team next year. But it didn't look like that at the end of November. Right. So the only two things that work out this year that we know for sure are proven products are Ace Bailey and Dylan Harper. And they're the two guys who just cannot seem to stay on the court for prolonged periods of time.
Yeah. All right. So some big picture good news. Hey, believe it or not, good news. Moved up 3 spots in the net rankings to 69. Nice. The bad news, the season ends with the next loss, I think. Basically. I might get it. 6 or 7 gets you there.
The season's over, Steve.
But
it's over.
It really actually does. It's like the Super Bowl. Like it wasn't over. It was over. But it will. If they lose to Iowa, we can stop talking about it, right? We can at least move on to the discussion. I think 1 loss, it's done. And I mean, look at the schedule again. Iowa, at Oregon, at Washington, USC, at Michigan, at Purdue. And Minnesota, I don't know. I mean, if you can tell me they can win 6 of those 7 games, you have seen something that I haven't seen. That's the way I can put it.
Yeah, absolutely. They're winnable games. They're huge underdog games in that stretch, and it's going to land somewhere in the middle. So, yeah. It's
like 3 and 4 would be good. Like 4 and 3 would be very good, right? On that stretch.
Yes. If you acknowledge the reality that they're not going to get an at-large bid, the last stand you have is that making the tournament 3 and 4 is fine. If you beat Iowa, you're practically in, right? Because Northwestern is imploding. They're going to finish in the bottom 3. Their best player broke his foot, is out. Their second best defender is out for the year with an ACL tear. They are done. Washington is a disaster. Barring Rutgers lose in Seattle and Washington going on a run, they're going to finish in the bottom 3. Nebraska has kind of saved itself, but on the other side, Penn State is again imploding, right? If you go on Penn State's KenPom page, they have a brick of red lines, which means losses of like 7 or 8 losses, and sandwiched somewhere in that middle is a win over Rutgers at home. That kind of sums things up too. But those 3 teams are going to end up in the bottom 3. So Rutgers is going to make the tournament, barring a collapse. So that's what you have to look forward to, because the season is over. It's over. This team hasn't won 2 straight games in a month. They've won 2 straight games 3 different times this season. That's it. 3 different times. And one of those was against 4 low major teams. This team cannot string together 2 wins, let alone 6 wins in a 7-game stretch. It's over, right? And if we're gonna play this string out, just really quickly, the one game they could lose is one of the road games to Michigan and Purdue. They got to sweep everything else. That's it. Is that possible? What do you guys give that? A 2% chance? 1% chance?
Yeah, I mean, pretty much. Yeah, I'll give it 2 just to be nice. Yeah,
you would say 2, and then you'll realize that someone won't play, someone will be hurt, and then I can't even give them 2%. Right? Like something that's almost too perfect for a Rutgers situation that's just been as unpredictable as anything, or totally predictable, really.
Right. The very predictable thing about this team is they're not a good basketball team, right? And we just don't. We and the Rutgers fan base don't want to acknowledge it because we still have this hope from September that this team really is good. It's just a matter of figuring things out. They're just not good. So it shouldn't be a surprise they lose at Maryland. Is my point. That's kind of the expected result.
Right. Yeah. Well said. Okay. Good point. All right. Some questions from the Discord. My favorite place on earth. I'm about done with the Discord, guys. Got to be honest with you. But last chance trying to save this thing. Got some questions. I opened up a new channel. I was told to open up a new channel only for questions and not for discussions about the downfall of society because of hip hop music. We have now just the channel for podcast questions. So I'm going to go in there now, see what we got. And this is my favorite one. This is good. I like this. Brian, you should answer this one. I find Brian's insights to be quite fair and accurate on the football team, but he seems to have a grudge against the basketball team. Is there some childhood trauma involved?
That's trauma involved in everything. First of all, we need to have a podcast separate to just learn about your exploits on Discord. I want to have a camera in the room when you're figuring out how to open a channel. This goddamn button doesn't work.
It's not. This is not old. This is not old man ranting. This is just I had an expectation for something, and this has not met it. It's someone pointed out that it's like the Rivals message board, only more modern. That's exactly what it is. I don't need that in my life. I got enough problems. I don't have to go online to Discord and get pissed off. I've got real things that piss me off. Pat, am I wrong here? You don't even go on.
Listen. I came to that realization maybe 2 days in.
You figured this out right away that this was a mistake. And you're just too nice to say something. That's what it is. You're just too nice of a person to come out and say, what are you thinking, Politi? That's what it is.
That's it.
It's your fault, Fonseca. You're the young one. You should have told us this.
The next step on this evolution is that you're just going to give out your personal cell phone number and people are going to text you their thoughts and ask for your opinion.
Just my address. Come ring the doorbell. We'll sit on the front porch. Give me a question. You can drive off. It'd be great. That's the way we did it. Back when the world was good. Back when...
You're impersonating my favorite person on the Discord. To answer the question and try to answer it seriously, because I have thought about this, right? I think there is a difference in the two programs in the sense that Rutgers football has had established success in the past, right? It has been, yes, a horrible program for a long time, but Greg Schiano, when his first stint came, created a standard for success in this program and won at Rutgers. He proved you could win at Rutgers, right? And the other thing is that Greg is a different cat personality-wise with Peichel. He's a likable guy. He's personable, but he's also a football coach. It's very much like a militant thing. Like he's the head coach of a football program. We talk to him once a week. There's just between Schiano and the fan base, there is not the same connection as there is with Steve Peichel. I think because Steve Peichel is the guy that ended a 30-year NCAA tournament drought, and because he makes every Rutgers fan feel like he's their uncle, right? People take everything you say about Steve Peichel and the Rutgers basketball program personally, like they insulted your uncle Steve, or like they really get upset about it. And that's why I think there's a lot more emotional reactions to legitimate, realistic criticism of the basketball program. I don't think I treat the programs differently. I really don't. I think I am equally as critical, and I try to be as straightforward as possible. But the way people take in the criticism, and not just from me, I think from everybody, that is the big difference. I really do think that people get so much more defensive with the Rutgers basketball program because with football, I think people really do feel like there is a pathway to success, with Schiano, without Schiano, and they think there is more to be done with Schiano. With basketball, I think there is this quiet fear from this long battered fan base that if they move on from Steve Peichel at any point, they're going to go back to the depths of the Big Ten and not make the tournament for 50 years. And he's the only person that can solve this, right? And they are so thankful for him being a nice guy who shakes their hand and talks to them and is like this big teddy bear that, again, anyone says remotely critical of the program, they feel like you're personally attacking them. That to me is the interpretation. I could be wrong. I thought about this a lot, believe it or not. That's kind of what I see. I don't know if you guys see it differently.
Yeah, I think there's some of that. Oh, I think it's a very small percent. I think most people at this point are ready to criticize the basketball program. I think it's a small amount of people who feel this way. I do. I think that for the most part, people are disappointed and realistic about it and pissed off. Like, I think that's I would say 80-20 at the minimum at this point. And I do think that that's also the case with football. Like, there are some people who don't like when you criticize Greg Schiano and get angry. I mean, but it does seem like it's more vocal in basketball. I mean, that's the best way to put it. I mean, we've been hard on football on the show. I mean, good grief, after the Illinois game. I mean, that was like some harsh stuff there.
Right. I think we're critical of Greg Schiano than Peichel. What do you think, Pat?
I think the criticism is absolutely it's not directed one way or the other. It's very much neutral, and when you guys need to be critical, it's critical, and I think it's totally fair. I just think, similarly, when you were explaining the trajectory and how Greg Schiano built it up, right? There's that similar thankfulness for getting it to a certain level exists on both sides, both programs. It's just where does it go from there, right? Greg Schiano came back as a savior, right? Like after, and I think that adds to it as well. I'm not saying that Peichel's leaving or anything like that, but it's just there's that added fondness, I guess, for Greg Schiano a little bit too, just to see in between what happened. So maybe that's a part of it as well.
I'm curious about Steve. At what point during Greg's first tenure did we start having the conversation? Well, not we. I was 10 years old. I wasn't part of the conversation. But when did the conversation start of like, this guy can't? He hit a ceiling. Like Rutgers can only hit a certain point under Greg Schiano. Because I'm sure that I know that was a talking point during the latter stages of his tenure. Right.
It's funny because I think in his tenure, early on, it was like, is this the guy? There was a lot of that early on. Like the first 4 years where we're just like, I mean, we're going to give this guy another, like, is this the guy? Does he know what he's doing? Not just because they were losing, but they lost some. Some of the results were just like, does he know what the hell can he coach at all? I mean, that was really the early narrative. Had the 2 good years. Then it became, he's great. He's going to get it there. Didn't get it to the next step. I think it went pretty quickly to, is this the ceiling? Like maybe year, I guess not quickly, but year 7 or 8. I think people are starting to wonder because after that 2007 year when it fell short, and then the next year, and then were strings of international Papa John's bowls when, those trips were just like, again, couldn't beat UConn. There were some games. And I think that's the difference between basketball and football is that basketball lost like that is so magnified, right? Like football is so magnified when you lose to UConn, when you have a chance to do it, when you lose to Louisville, when you have a chance to win again, those games stick with you more. Whereas in basketball, like you're the next day, you can beat Illinois the next day and make people forget about that. I think that's part of my analysis, if that makes any sense. Like there's more results. There's more like Steve Peichel can show you all these top 25 wins. He's got more opportunities. It's easier to win a top 25 game in basketball. Right?
Yes. I think the one-to-one comparisons, that's a perfect example of why they're not perfect, right? Because I saw when Steve Peichel beat Illinois, when Rutgers beat Illinois last week, it was like, this was Steve's 17th win over a ranked opponent in 9 years. Like,
it's amazing.
Won one in 15 years, right? But I'm sure Steve has played 4 times as many teams, right? And basketball, it's so much easier to beat a ranked opponent than football. That's just the reality, right? Mm-hmm. Upsets happen so much more often in college basketball. Not to diminish the achievements that Rutgers has had basketball-wise, but for football, it's hard. And I had to go down and sit down how many of those top 25 losses football has had over the years have been to top 10 teams, right? Anyway, that's why I don't think the one-to-one comparisons are fair. But I asked that question because to acknowledge the difference in criticism we've had, right? Greg Schiano had the greatest season in Rutgers football history outside of the 1869 national championship in 06. And 3 years later, people were already saying, well, is this guy ever going to take us to the next level? Steve Peichel made 2 NCAA tournaments, has regressed every year since, is about to miss the NCAA tournament with 2 5-star players. And just now the conversation is becoming, is this guy, like, what's the ceiling for this guy playing on the bubble and sneaking into the tournament, right? Like, that conversation probably should have started a year or two ago. And it's just now going to start for most people. And I say that to show the more leeway he has gotten.
It is fascinating. Yeah. And he's got more leeway with stuff like the built-in excuse. It's funny because, it's not like Greg Schiano. He's had a tough schedule. He's facing programs that have paid their players forever before NIL. It's not like there's, some surprise. It is interesting to me that people have been eased. Like a lot of people have been more willing to say, oh, but look what he's got. Look at the NIL situation for basketball. Whereas in football, it's like, why can't you beat Illinois? Well, what have you told you? Illinois is spending twice as much as Rutgers. Like, that's entirely possible. It is sort of fascinating, right? That is a good point that a lot of people aren't willing to give Greg Schiano the same rope that they've been willing to give Steve Peichel. Interesting.
And the injuries as well. Like, even this season, again, not 1-for-1. It's not a 1-to-1 comparison, but just, Rutgers defense struggled a lot because of a lot of injuries, right? That definitely played a factor.
By far had a worse injury situation in basketball. By far.
Agreed. But my point is just like that was clearly a factor that we have to discuss how much it weighs, how much of a factor it played. Whereas this season with basketball, we're going to have that conversation eventually, like how much of the season was derailed to injuries to their best players. It's not 1-to-1. I cannot emphasize that enough. But I do think how we discuss those two things is another example of the dichotomy between these two programs, where people get so up in arms when we criticize basketball. To end this point, I think we've been lenient to basketball compared to football. I think that's true.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting. So I think people there's going to be a portion of this fan base who's going to shrug this season off and say, "Well, Dylan was hurt," and that's why they're not in the NCAA tournament. When that is not true. And that's very interesting to me because I think football has a bigger argument to make about where it finished because of injuries than basketball does. And I have dismissed the football thing myself on this podcast. So, it's worth it. It's worth noting. All right. Ready to move on? Okay. Old Mark had a question about the flu shots, which I love that. This is where this season is gone. Your season in the shitter when you're talking about flu shots at the press conference. But Steve Peichel was asked about flu shots. Did he volunteer this information? Old Mark wants to know. And his point is he's a pharmacist. How is it possible these guys have gotten sick while having flu shots? I don't know. Horrible times will happen. So what did Steve Peichel say about it?
I'm not a doctor. Now, Steve was asked, is there anything he can do to prevent the illness? Right? That was the question. And his response was, we all got the flu shot, but it's a bad strand. I think he means strain. Again, I'm not a doctor. And I think my couple of theories here. One, apparently, isn't there like a neurovirus or something going around that's like infecting people? I think that's different than the flu.
Yes.
And two, every college basketball team, every season has seemingly dealt with the flu, right? Like this does not feel like a new phenomenon to me. I feel like we've had this happen year after year.
Players get sick. Yep. Mm-hmm.
It's just a thing, right? For Rutgers, it sucks that it happened to their 2 best players, but I don't think this is out of the ordinary. And I don't know what they want Steve Peichel to do. Like, what do you want Steve Peichel and Rich Campbell to do?
Well, he finally recruited some players who can hit free throws. Now we need to recruit some players with better immune systems. That's what it's got to be. Steve Peichel needs to go in the portal and look at some genetics here. Find some people. Find some guy. Has your mom been sick? Your dad grow up? We need to start recruiting people who stay healthy. I'm kidding, of course, because I'm going to get people.
The criticism coming on the Rutgers Rant of this discussion the last 10 minutes is going to be unbelievable.
Discord is actually going to live up to it. Yeah.
This is great. Okay. This will push you out of the Discord. I think this might be the final one.
This will be what?
You think
I'll go back. I'll sign up for my Rivals account after that. Too funny. All right. So we don't know. I mean, people get sick. That's it. It happens. I don't know. Right? It sucks. People hurt their ankles.
Maryland was down a guy for sickness today, or not today, yesterday.
Yeah.
So it happens.
Wasn't Derek Queen, but it does happen. Yeah. Another question: what happened to Dylan's 3-point shooting? It's a good point. I mean, I certainly thought he'd be better from outside. Looks like he's in a bit of a slump there. Doesn't help that the rest of the team can't find it. And any thoughts on Dylan's 3-point shooting?
Dylan Harper,
correct. Okay, so
yeah. He was 3 of 5 against Illinois. Like, he had a good game. The issue with Dylan Harper, I think this was kind of a concern coming into the season from like NBA scouts, is streakiness, right? And I think that I have to pull up his game log. But
maybe it's not. Maybe it's Dylan Grant's 3-point shooting. It just says what happened to Dylan's 3-point shooting. I don't know.
Well
do them both.
Yeah.
Okay.
So Dylan Harper, streaky guy. It feels like, again, I'd have to pull up the game log. It feels like he has some really good games, some not great games, right? Just kind of good, bad. He's an average 3-point shooter, right? And I think part of it is he wants to show that he can be a 3-point shooter for NBA scouts. And some games he's done a really good job. Like I said, Illinois played a big part in the win with his 3-point shooting. Some games he's struggled, like yesterday. Dylan Grant had a nice stretch for a couple games where he was hitting threes, and you thought that maybe the early season struggles from threes were an anomaly. It turns out that stretch where he was hitting threes is an anomaly. Much like when JaMychal Davis started hitting threes all of a sudden, it's just an anomaly. Eventually, they're going to regress to the mean. That's what happened. Showed some real regression. He's shooting 22% on threes. I think he's a lot closer to 22% than 32%, which is, I think that's what would take Dylan Grant's game to the next level. If he could hit threes, man, then you're talking like a really, really, really good player. But he's still pretty good on the glass, finishing around the rim, long arms, long limbs, high motor. Like, you have a lot of good things in Dylan Grant. Being a 3-point shooter, at least for now, is just not one of them.
I remember Dylan Harper's scouting report coming out of high school talked a lot about, of course, everything kind of you're seeing was pretty accurate. I got to give the guys credit that, like, the scouts, people from recruiting rankings, things like that, like, pretty accurately described his game to a T. I remember writing the blurbs and all those things about what he does really well, and is exactly getting to the rim, getting downhill, distributing. He could be a streaky shooter was always the line in every single recap, blurb, assessment. And I think you're just kind of seeing that a little bit play out. I think that's kind of how it's been. And when you're dominating high school games and you're so much better than everyone else, little things like that get swept under the carpet when you're a 500 team and everyone's looking for something to nitpick. That's what it's gonna be. So I think this has always been out there for sure.
Yeah, I do think Maryland was another example of like him taking his ability to get downhill in high school and doing it against grown men in college. Like, he was going coast to coast, dribbling between his legs, behind his back, through 3 defenders, and finishing at the rim. Like, he is really, really good at getting downhill, finishing at the rim. I think that is a transferable skill, and distributing. I mean, he had 4 assists. He probably should have had 8 or 9. The passes he was making there was one play where he dribbles into the paint, spin moves, knows the double team is coming, has Dylan Grant wide open, passes the ball between 2 defenders for a Dylan Grant dunk. High level, 2 steps ahead of the defense, knowing where things are coming, passing accuracy. Just like, these are the plays that would drive me nuts if I was a Rutgers fan, because you have this guy who does stuff like that. Who has ever done stuff like that in a Rutgers uniform? It's unbelievable, the highlights these guys do. But anyway, not to make people more depressed, but I just did want to make a point that, like, he is finishing at a really high level, and the distributing, the assist numbers aren't as, they're gaudy, but if you watch the games, watch him pass the ball around, it's something to behold.
Right. Totally. Here's a question for you, Pat, a good one. Ooh, how much does Pat think revenue sharing NIL will take to get, or how much does Pat think revenue sharing NIL would it take? I see, not would it take to get our wrestling program over the hump and into top 5 land?
Wow.
To generate as much revenue as it returns. Fascinating. So you think if they gave, because they're not going to get a nickel from revenue sharing that I can see. They're not going to get any money from this. But if they did, if they had a big donor, like a big wrestling guy, like I'm going to put him over the hump.
The first step for wrestling, and this is just look across the sport and the landscape of what is happening to college wrestling. This is not a new phenomena. This is the thing that people have feared for since the NCAA / 50 programs, 60 programs, right? It's always been about how do we grow the sport holistically? How do we build audience? How do we get this into the mainstream conversation? So Rutgers is in a unique place where it's basically revenue sufficient. So I think that's the first step, is like, does Rutgers, can athletic departments in the Big Ten sustain this level of Olympic sport caliber programs that can support themselves. Rutgers is in a really good place with that in itself, right? The attendance is good. They do a great job. They bring in revenue. It's a very self-sufficient program. It always has been. It's a very popular sport in New Jersey. So what would it take to get Rutgers over the top? Wow. Really hard to say. But we talked about Bo Bassett here last week, and he went to Iowa. That's a program that has been one of the most popular sports in the entire university, right?
Right. I would love to see.
It's a night. It's really, I can't really say. I don't know from a numbers perspective, but it would be really the thing. If you were really caring about wrestling, just worry about the future of like.
If you could give $1 million to it, I'd be fascinating to see if you could just if someone had 7 figures to drop on wrestling just to see what would happen. Be interesting.
Yeah. And even here, look at what Michigan did the last couple of years, brought in huge people in the transfer portal. One of the Jersey guys I know, Shane Griffith, was one of them, right? It was a national champion, landed in Michigan. They were rolling out the money. There's no question about it. So and now Michigan is a program that's had its worst season in a long time. It's really fascinating to see like what it all holds. So
right. Yep.
I can't give a good answer to this one, unfortunately.
Yeah.
Bo Bassett,
it's hard.
Bo Bassett reportedly is making $5 million in NIL. I don't know if that's spread out through 4 years. I don't know what the exact numbers are, but that's the number that's been floating around wrestling reporting since he committed to Iowa. I don't think that's obviously the exception, right? This is the most hyped up recruit nationally, maybe ever, or certainly up there, top 10, right? But to become a top 5 program, you have to be really, really, really good, like having an all-American guy at every weight, right? At the bare minimum, and have multiple national champions, or at least 1 or 2. Like that right? That's finished top 5 nationally.
No doubt.
It takes a lot of money to get those guys, right? I don't think wrestling money is as high as basketball or football, except for the elite guys. And you're battling against like Penn State. They're a dynasty that's going to get guys because they've proven they can turn really good wrestlers into national champions. I guess to answer the question, Steve, if you give them $3 million, I think that gives you a legitimate chance of
Yeah. If you gave Steve Pikiell $3 million, he'd have a power forward and a center, I think, too, right? I think if you gave,
maybe,
no doubt.
Yeah, pretty much you would. I think pretty sure. Yeah,
you can. Right, the whole idea of why people win in recruiting is so different in wrestling and basketball and football, right? Like kids are not going, right? Anthony Ashnault and Nick Soriano didn't come to Rutgers because they were searching for money. They just wanted to find the best fit for them at that time, right? And then that's a whole nother story. But anyway,
yep,
that's the changing landscape we hit on every day.
Wrestling's a different sport in the sense that the guys that are in the room with you make a big impact, right? Like they help you get better. Penn State is like a self-serving prophecy where you have really good guys in the room against other really good guys that get each other better. And now you have these 2 elite wrestlers becoming much better than everyone else, right? Whereas basketball, like you could have a good, Rutgers has 2 NBA players. That doesn't mean Tyson Acuff and JaMychal Davis or, that stuff's rubbing off on them. Whereas with wrestling, like you need that elite competition to get better. You understand what I'm saying?
No doubt.
And that's obviously attractive, right? If Rutgers can get really high-level guys, that would attract other high-level guys. And there's obviously, like we've mentioned before, the Scarlet Knights Wrestling Club, which is a whole, that part of the college wrestling scene, that's a whole different thing as well. So I agree, Pat. It's more complex. But I think money does help solve a lot of the problems if you can get it.
Yes, indeed. Believe me. Solve some problems around my house. I can get it. All right, couple more questions. If you made a movie about this year's basketball team, what would the title be? I'm going with One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. Only the flu is spelled F-L-U. You see what he did there? Huh? See what he did there?
So Spalletti just stopped listening to the wrestling conversation and for the last 5 minutes has been coming up with this headline. That's fantastic.
I didn't.
So good.
That's a reader on the Discord who said
I thought I thought you said that. That was great. Good job, reader. That was terrific.
I did tune out the wrestling conversation, as I do every time. Every time we talk about wrestling, I find myself with like the Homer Simpson donut air over my head. But what would we call this? What would the movie title be for this season? That's a good question.
Really?
Who's got one?
Scary movie?
Scary, yeah, that's right.
It's both scary and funny.
Groundhog Day. We've done that one already. I don't know. Gonna have to come up with one. I don't have a good one on top of my head. Oh, I like one.
Forrest Gump.
Forrest Gump.
Are there movies about natural disasters?
Yes, Twister. Yeah, what are they? Yeah,
Day After Tomorrow.
Day After
Tomorrow. Final Destination.
The Missed Opportunity. How about just
let's workshop this?
What?
Let's workshop this and let the Discord fans.
We're gonna go back. Good. Okay, good idea. All right, and finally, will people actually show up to the rack Wednesday night with the snow? I don't know what the conditions are going to be. I don't. I mean, that's good. I hope so. I mean, you got 3 chances left, folks. This is it. Like, you're not gonna. The next time you got 3 chances, then the next time you will see Ace Bailey will be, unless you get tickets at the Barclays Center for the draft, or Dylan Harper. This is it. So I would think if you have tickets, you would want to honor those tickets for this game. And games against Iowa have been great over the years. They've been some fantastic basketball games against Iowa.
If you like high scoring, high octane, zero defense basketball, you want to come to this game, because these are 2 teams that can score the ball and not guard a lick. It's going to be 120 to 111 with 4 minutes left in the second half.
Yeah. And Iowa's not good.
Awesome.
Right. I looked at this up. Iowa is now, they've lost 6 of the last 7 and the 1W is a 1-point win over Penn State. So this is a game Rutgers should win, right?
Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, even if they're not at their best, this is I don't know what the line is on this game, but Rutgers should win this game.
Their starting center is out. Like, their best player is out.
Yeah.
Right. So in theory, the one major disadvantage you have is neutralized. If you are one of these people who love to scream that in the NBA it's not good anymore because it's all offense and nobody plays any defense, right? If you're one of those people, then in your theory, Dylan Harper and Ace Bailey are going to score 90 points, right? Because this is their NBA style, no defense, score at will, right? So in theory, this is the game you want to be at to watch Dylan Harper and Ace Bailey. To your point, Steve, Rutgers will never have an NBA player, or at least a 5-star freshman, ever again. And there are 3 more chances you have to watch these guys. 3.
The NBA was better when I was younger, just like the halftime show is better when it was up with people performing, not all these niche acts like, what's his name? This Lamar Kendrick fella. What do you say? You guys who don't follow the Discord have no idea what I'm talking about. But
what would Vince Lombardi think watching a halftime show?
Oh, he'd be like, "Where's the Grambling band, man? Let's get back to what this should be." And you, apparently, what I've learned here in this podcast, Brian, is apparently you agree with him. Apparently, you would like to get back to the days of Up With People and the Grambling band.
I would like to get back to the days where we didn't need, we talk about iPad kids now, like kids need to have entertainment, second screens, they can't have a moment of silence anymore. We are iPad adults where we can't have a halftime, where we sit in the crowd for 15 minutes and talk about the first half of football we just watched. We got to have some rapper stand in front of me, dancing and screaming. We got to have commercials with these crazy lights in front of me. Like, iPad kids, iPad generation, iPad world. It's a disgrace. Just it's the same thing as we talked about in the Rutgers athletic games, where you can't have a moment of silence to talk to your friend next to you about the 4 minutes of basketball you just watched. You got to hear "make some noise" and all these stupid T-shirt tosses. I'm shocked nobody's got hit in the face with a stupid T-shirt from all these. It's anyway.
Sports used to be about sports. Sports and entertainment have gone like that, right? Like, it's just blurred. It's
blurred. It is.
The sports are entertaining enough. They're sports.
It used to be.
It used to be back in my day. Let me tell you something. Leather helmets. They didn't have any entertainment at all.
Did you know Vince Lombardi's final resting spot is in Middletown, New Jersey?
I did know that. Yeah, it's good.
I didn't.
Little teaser.
He's rolling over in the grave.
Probably is.
All right. Anything else we got? Women's basketball. They won a big game, but they lost their best player. Not their best player. They lost one of their most productive players. Certainly their biggest name player, Keelan McMiller, out with an injury or something. We don't know exactly what's going on there. But Rutgers won a game, and they have another chance to win. So they're maybe certainly not going to finish in the Big Ten basement. That's good.
The women's tournament also needs to be top 15, yes?
I don't know.
Same thing as the men's?
Let's, I think so. You would think. Yes. Right. I just Googled it.
So,
but Purdue is certainly in the bottom, right? They have one win in the Big Ten.
Yes.
So.
Purdue's bad. I think Northwestern's bad. There's a couple of bad teams in the Big Ten below Rutgers.
It's a big win in the sense they won a game, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's good. Yeah. This is a team. What are they now? 2-11?
Yes, indeed.
Something like that?
Yeah. They only play 18 games in the women's Big Ten, apparently.
Still. And Kiyomi, I believe the quote from Coquise Washington was that Kiyomi is not 100%. When she is 100%, she will play, which is a poor omen, because are we ever really 100%? Any of us?
Not since I was 26 years old have I been 100%. Yep. That's for sure. I've been playing hurt ever since. Lost an assistant coach in football. How do we feel about that? I guess.
Drew Lascari was the assistant coach who went to the NFL. The connection, obviously, with Anthony Campanelli came back. They go way back. They were together at Don Bosco. A lot of history between them. So this is an opportunity for Drew Lascari to move on up to the NFL. I'm not surprised by it. He was a pretty good coach at Rutgers. But yeah, I think just there's some shuffling, and it's not an unexpected departure, right? From my perspective.
I don't think the staff will change. They don't have to hire another assistant to replace safeties coach. They could probably promote somebody if they wanted to. They could hire somebody. I truthfully don't know, but I'm not entirely worried that the safety coaching position is going to make or break the 2025 season. I don't think there will be change in the staff, but it's worth bringing this up. Richie O'Leary, who covers Rutgers and Penn State for rivals, Penn State, their running backs coach left the program this week. Rutgers has a stud running backs coach who is crushing it in recruiting and is receiving a lot of credit for developing Kyle Monungai and Demir Shaw. I think if not for this opening, I have no indication he's going to get the job or whatever, but I think he certainly would be a candidate. Richie seems to think he'll be a candidate. But just even if it's not this one, I think he'll be a hot commodity going forward as a running backs coach or any other position, right? I think he's a rising star in the profession. This is part of the deal you make when you have these young stud coaches that eventually they're going to get posted.
Penn State's certainly paying coaches a lot of money at this point too. Not that Rutgers isn't, but yeah, certainly there's bidding wars for some of these programs to get coaches. So yeah, could happen. All right. And finally, if you were thinking, at least basketball's over, it's lacrosse season, I've got some bad news for you. Men's lacrosse lost. Not looking good there. What's going on?
They lost to Stony Brook. They scored 8 goals, which I think is low in lacrosse, right? Like the lack of, and this is what I read from the lacrosse experts on the message boards, but the lack of half-court scoring. Interesting. The parallels between some of these sports.
Really?
Half-field scoring. I guess half-court is the, whatever. The point is, when they're not
always a breakout team. Yeah, they've always been a running team.
Right. Which you can't really, unless you're Michigan State basketball, it's hard to build an entire program on being a transition team, right? So this was never really going to, I don't think this was going to be a standout year. This was always going to be kind of a rebuilding year and try to sneak into the NCAA tournament. I think that loss kind of makes it really, really hard to do that. And I think, yes, to your point, this is going to be another long spring that only really baseball can save, I think. Or maybe softball builds on their big year last year and they have a big year. But those are really the two sports left that can make you feel like there's something good happen this year.
Right. This podcast is just going to be us talking about cultural issues in the United States. That's going to be on our next show. I'm kidding. We won't do that. All right. Should we sign off there, Pat? Any final thoughts? Why don't you end this for us? Please have a final thought.
Final thought.
Give me something.
Oh, man. My hot take was watching the Super Bowl, and I just thought, man, if all the things could come together for Rutgers the way that if there was any similarities of how do you structure a football team, the Eagles certainly did a really good job of that and creating an identity, something I've talked about a lot. If Rutgers can get back to playing that defensive, hard-nosed, disruptive defense, that'd be a really good thing for 2025 and something we can really hang our hats on.
There you go. A little optimistic note. Good job. All right. We'll be back. I don't know when, sometime after the Iowa game. Until then, thanks for listening.